one of the big questions that we seem to be asked, I know there's no crystal ball for this, but it's the one question you can't get away from when you're talking about property at the moment. It's about house prices. So where next for house prices? I mean, has the stamp duty, I mean, anecdotally, I've heard about the stamp duty holiday pushing up prices. I mean, I'll be honest with you, somebody a couple of doors up from me has put their property on, I'm sure as a result of this, and the amount they want for it, it's just not worth it because it's the same house as I live in. Is that a widespread issue? Are house prices high? And I mean, where do you see them going from there? I know you've not got a crystal ball, but lots of people in the industry will have a view, and you'll get a sense of what they are thinking.
Yes, I guess from my perspective, they are volatile, and they are just by nature of kind of the whole world being pretty volatile at the moment. Some of the reports, there was a report came out this morning that said they expected house prices to be up around 7% this year in the UK as an average. Interestingly, London seems to be the place that isn't experiencing that. That's broadly flat, 1-2% up year on year. It's actually the places outside of London that are really experiencing the asset prices going up, and I think that's just a function of what you see, what you hear when you're talking to your friends around. Is it the right time to move out, have a bit more space? I could be remote working for another few years, and I think we're seeing that. In terms of how that plays out in the long run, so I guess there's a few risks. The first being when the stamp duty changes end in March next year, what does that look like for the property market? But also fundamentally, I feel like we have people at the moment making longer term decisions with their transactions. So people are looking at buying properties for 2, 3, 4, 5 years time, which hopefully brings some kind of stability into the house prices in the future. I don't know if that's what you think, Verona.
I would echo all of that, Ben. And I saw the same report that you did this morning. And yeah, I think there's definitely growth in house prices, and we're definitely seeing that pretty much everywhere outside of the two areas that we're not seeing that growth is Aberdeen because of the oil industry and central London. But elsewhere we're seeing house prices growth, and on average it's around between sort of 3 and 5% at the minute. And it looks like it'll peak out at about 7% by the end of this year. I mean, whilst the housing market over the longer term is obviously reasonably robust, it isn't immune to the economic impact of what the pandemic is going to do, because, you know, we still have the economic impact to play out. There is a suggestion that unemployment is going to be at 8% by the end of this year. That clearly will have an impact on the housing market. And it's more about affordability. So, yeah, you're right. We don't have a crystal ball, but everything suggests that whilst the stamp duty is in play, or the stamp duty relief is in play, they will continue to rise. But there comes a point where if you haven't sold your property, and honestly, it's probably reasonably close now. If you haven't sold your property by the end of October, the chances of that transaction completing by the deadline of the 31st of March is highly unlikely. So bearing in mind everything that I said earlier about the constraint on all the stakeholders within the transaction, that is putting a lot more pressure, and it's taken longer to complete those transactions now. So unless the government extends that deadline, we could be in a little bit of it could be an interesting position early next year. Yeah, with a lot of people in the pipeline that may not complete.
I agree with that, and I echo your thoughts. It seems to be getting towards the time now where you're going to have to start, if you want to take advantage of that, start kind of thinking about selling or buying right now. The one thing that I always think when I talk about house prices and what they look like in the future and what they look like now is that for most people transacting on houses, buying and selling, the chain is a point in time decision. So in some respects, it might be really good that you sell your current house for more than you thought you would. But there's the other end of the spectrum that says you have to buy somewhere to live in now, so you might be paying over the odds to live in there in the future. So because at a point in time, if you get a good deal on your house, the likelihood is you probably won't get a cheap deal on the house that you're buying. So it's just an interesting dynamic.
And the other factor, of course, is the mortgage rate that you're going to get at that time. So if you have to put in a bigger deposit, and that might cause you some other challenges on your disposable income. You know, when there's less pressure on the housing market, you may get a better mortgage rate over the longer term. So, you know, it ebbs and flows. And because property is a long-term investment, and you're not buying, unless you're an investor, and most investors buy investments for the long term anyway. You know, I would always guide to think of the longer term, not just the next 6 months or whether you're going to save on stamp duty. There's other factors at play.